How long do you have to live together to be a common law wife, common law husband?
In Vancouver, which is in the province of British Columbia, that's 2 years.
That's it, huh?
That's it.
Oh, be careful, Canadian boys.
I know, right?
I didn't mean to marry
gals,
her.
and
I think I
gals.
heard you say that the old style of estate planning centered around keeping the assets in the family as long as possible. Did you say something like that?
From my observations, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think I heard you say that you offer a different approach to estate planning. Can you tell me about that?
Yes. So,
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to the High Realty Podcast. My name's Kaleo, founder of the Hawaii Institute of Real Estate. And what else? Just that today. Founder of the High Realty Podcast and highrealtycourses.com. That's what I was looking for. I'm here today with our very special guest, attorney Julie Suen. She is would we say the owner of Infinity Estate Law? Owner and founder of Infinity State Law. And she's been in estate planning for at least 10 years, but practicing since 2007. Is that right?
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So please join me in a warm welcome, studio audience, Julie Suen. Hey, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
Julie, where are you from?
I was born in Hong Kong.
Okay.
Yes, and I spent a majority of my life in Canada.
Wow.
And I moved to Hawaii about 10 years ago.
Nice. And when you moved to Hawaii, were you a lawyer? How'd you get into lawyering?
Okay, so I was a lawyer and I came here on a student visa, actually. I did my Master's of Laws with UH here
Nice.
at Richardson, yes.
Is that what's that degree called? The
LLM.
LLM.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, and at that point in my life, I was practicing for about 7 years in Vancouver, worked for a variety of firms, did a different batch of practice areas and needed a change. And here I am. I never left.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is there a big difference between Canadian law and American law?
There's subtle differences.
Okay.
I wouldn't say it's really that significant.
Both are based off of English common law?
That's correct.
Is that a reach? No.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's correct. Exactly.
Nice,
It's not.
nice.
Yeah, it's not like civil, as in like Europe.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is a common law spouse? What is that?
That's if you've lived together with somebody long enough that they're considered your legal spouse. But that's not here in the States, so you don't have to worry about that.
Does that exist in Canada?
Yes, it actually does.
How long do you have to live together to be a common law wife, common law husband?
In Vancouver, which is in the province of British Columbia, that's 2 years.
That's it, huh?
That's it.
Oh, be careful, Canadian boys.
I know, right?
I didn't mean to marry her.
and
It's
gals.
been 2 years.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, the first time I heard that term, my uncle, who's from Canada, was talking to me about somebody that he knew in Canada. And he referred to the person as so-and-so's wife. And I said, oh, I thought they weren't married. And he's like, well, that's his common law wife. I'm like, what? You're just making stuff up now. But
Yeah.
apparently not.
They take that seriously there.
Yeah. How long do you have to be somebody's kid in order to be a common law kid?
I don't know if that. I don't know if that exists.
Like an illegitimate son? Or like he's 2 years old now. It's like, okay, now he's your son.
Oh,
kind of
well,
thing.
yeah. I think with a kid, you're stuck with them
Okay.
from day one.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Tell me about Infinity Estate Law. What do you do?
Yeah. So I specialize in. So I don't know if that's the camera that's like facing me right now. Is that?
That one is. Yeah.
Okay, so I can talk into it as well, right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
just curious. So I started in Infinity Estate Law actually out of, two reasons. One, I wanted to own my own practice.
Okay.
And then the second one is because I wanted to do something very different and very personal as an attorney. I have a wide variety of practices and experience from different areas and in my work in law firms, etc. One thing that really stood out to me was when I was working as an estate litigation attorney for a really big firm in Canada.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's when siblings, they weren't happy with their parents' estate plan, and then they go ahead and they challenge it in court. And that's what I assisted them to do back then. So with that experience, I saw how when we're planning, there's so much that we can anticipate and put in so that doesn't happen. And that's what I incorporate into my practice today.
Nice.
Yeah, and there's also a sense that there's a need to upgrade how we do our estate planning. I take a very practical approach, and the approach of more creating possibilities for future generations than trying to keep everything within the family as long as possible, which I find to kind of be a more traditional approach in the estate planning practice.
Okay.
So there's a sense of me wanting to revamp that. It comes from seeing, what happens after somebody dies. And it's usually very different from what somebody imagines. If I go in and I do an estate plan and I paid for all these documents, then everything should be good to go. I'm at peace, I'm taken care of. Well, that's actually not entirely the truth, because the estate plan doesn't actually start working until you're dead. And I always tell people that, you actually have no idea whether or not your estate plan actually worked for you. You will not.
Never know.
You will not.
Whether your estate plan works.
Yeah,
for you.
because you're no longer here.
Wow.
You've either become incapacitated or you're dead. So the only people who knows whether your estate planning works are the people who comes after. They're either your trustee, your executor, or your children.
Wow.
Or your beneficiaries. So those are things that I like to keep in mind when I am doing planning for my clients.
I was curious about the history of a trust. In our off-camera conversation, you'd mentioned that it was designed for families with a lot of wealth, right? And I do teach a little bit about trusts in our real estate courses, land trusts, irrevocable living trusts, that kind of thing. But as I understand it, all trusts have the trustor, trustee, and beneficiary, right? And what, in its most simplest form, what is a trust?
Yeah, so I don't want to necessarily do like a trust law 101 right now.
Okay.
And to correct that statement, it's not.
I will receive that correction.
Yeah, a trust is not an instrument that was created only for the wealthy.
Okay.
So there are certain elements that are required for a trust to be created. So a trustor, a trustee, and assets, okay, to be funded into an instrument. Having said all of that, what I was getting at is the traditional way of planning an estate, and in particularly a trust. As I see it, a lot of trusts had the approach of having to avoid paying estate taxes as the main objective of planning a trust. And so that has shifted since the estate tax exemption has increased significantly since the Trump administration.
That's the limit
that one can pass on in the form of your estate inheritance without having to pay any estate taxes.
Okay.
Right. So as per the current limits, that's 12.9 million per individual. And when you have a married couple, that's double the amount. So that's, relatively, especially in the state of Hawaii, it's pretty significant. It's a large amount. But the amount is going to be, it's going to be decreased. Okay, come 2025. So the law that established that that amount is going to sunset in 2025. So now it's going to go down to 5 million adjusted for inflation.
Per person.
Per person, right. Okay. So I'm not saying estate tax is not relevant and it's not something that we don't have to pay attention to. It's definitely something I do pay attention to in my practice. And but there are other things too that we may look at, is what I'm saying. Uh, for example, capital gains tax or income taxes are things that you could look into when you're planning in your trust. And then there are other equally important elements that cannot be overlooked, such as your trustee selection, right? Because how a trust is written has no bearing on whether or not your trust is going to be executed. Because there's no overarching authority to make sure that, you know, the trust is going to be executed the way you want it until somebody goes to court and challenge it. The first people that are going to go and look at your trust and make sure that it's going to be executed are the trustees.
Okay.
So the first thing I always tell clients when we're designing a trust, I always say, your most important decision you're going to make with respect to your trust are the trustees that you select, are the trustee selection.
Okay.
Right. You got to trust them. You've got to trust that they're going to do exactly what you tell them to do in the trust. And that's a big responsibility. And a lot of parents, they like to choose their children as, right, naturally as their trustees. Well, you got to make sure they get along. Are they going to get along? Are they going to do their job? You know, what are you putting in the trust? What are they required to do? Is it something that they know how to do? Okay. Wow. Of course, they're going to get support. I mean, it is expected. Nobody is expected to read through a trust and know what to do unless you've done it before, or you're very familiar with the legal terms and etc. That's fine. But most of the time, you're expected to go and search out for an attorney to help with the administration. That's also fine. What's the cost of that?
Wow.
Right? People always think about, okay, how much do I pay for the trust now? Think about how much your kids have to pay for administering the trust after the fact.
Okay. So I'm asking on behalf of my generation who might, like, let's say our parents are creating trusts.
Yes.
And what does a trustee have to do? Like you said, like when you pick trustees, you want to make, like, can they do it? What is a trustee supposed to do?
Right. So it's usually pretty... The steps, if I tell you, it sounds pretty basic. Okay. You gather inventory.
Let's start there.
Right.
Okay.
You gather an inventory of the assets. So you know what's in the trust and what's not in the trust. And then you read through the document and understand what you're supposed to do. So what are the distribution provisions? Do I have to sell things? Or are everything supposed to stay in the trust? What are the terms? How long is the trust supposed to go on for? How long are the things supposed to stay in the trust after? At what ages may the assets be distributed? So these are, kind of the common things that are in the trust. But it's the in-between. So if you were to keep these things inside the trust, well, what am I supposed to do with these assets in the meantime? Okay, so if it's real estate, I have to manage it. So now I've got to, do I hire people to manage it? Do I do it on my own? So it's the nitty gritty, right? That you have to consider. It could be a lot of work.
Yeah.
You manage properties.
Yep.
I assume, right? How much work is it to manage one piece of property? How much work is it to dedicate time to manage more than one property? And then think about doing that on behalf of all the beneficiaries of a trust,
right,
in their best interest. So, of course, you can hire people to do these things, and trustees are expected to hire people to do these things. But still, I mean, that's something that's still on your shoulders to do.
So how important is it for a trustee to know what's in the trust prior to the passing of the trustor?
I leave that to my clients to decide whether or not they want to share their trust and what's inside of it to the trustee. of course, that's not my,
Sure.
right. Like it's not my decision.
Mm-hmm.
It's my client's decision. But just going back to the main point here is it's important to choose a trustee who has common sense, who would know how to seek out for help, and somebody you trust, because your assets are all going to go into their names. Right. So you've got to trust them with all of your assets. Okay. And this is something I tell everyone. It's so important. I don't care if you have a trust. I don't care, how much assets you have. The most basic thing you can do in your estate planning is get out a piece of paper or have a document on your computer. List all of your assets. What are your account numbers? Did you designate any death beneficiaries for your bank accounts? Did you do that?
Did
Kaleo?
I?
Yeah.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
No. I
Right.
have
So if
not.
something
No.
happened to you, what's going to happen to your bank account? Right. So it's very basic, right? But we the most basic thing, a lot of people start estate planning thinking about, I got to call up an attorney. But honestly, first thing first, go list out all of your assets.
Take inventory.
Right. Take inventory. What are the accounts holders? What are the account numbers? If you have retirement accounts, you have investment accounts. Who's managing them for you? That's the point of contact, right? So if something happened to you, that's the person that your next of kin or your spouse or whoever is going to go to. And for people who don't have next of kin or a spouse, well, you got to figure out who's going to assist you, right? And you got to tell them. You got to talk to them. Hey, here's my accounts. I've named you as a death beneficiary. So you got to give them that information, because the bank's not going to disclose that. If you tell your brother or something, hey, I named you as a beneficiary, well, your brother's got to know the bank account and go talk to the bank about that.
Wow.
Yeah, because the bank's not going to just talk to some stranger and like claiming an account, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay. Let me finish one more thing.
Yeah, please.
People have a misconception that we all need a will. You do not need a will. Okay? That's the last thing you need. Okay? Anytime there is a will, anytime you rely on a will to distribute your assets, it's guaranteed probate. As a matter of fact, that's what probate was invented for, is to validate your will and for the court to validate the distribution process and to make sure that you don't owe anybody money. That's why the first step in probate is always advertising in the newspaper to all your creditors. Okay, so if you want to avoid probate, we do not use a will to plan your estate. Okay, you don't necessarily need a trust. Remember what I just talked about, naming death beneficiaries. You can do that for most of your assets. For your real estate assets, not so much, because of the, recording system and all of that. And that's why most people do a trust to, put their real estate asset into. And there's other alternatives as well. You can always do a transfer on death deed, for example, right? Depending on your family circumstances, depending on how you want to plan things, that's always an option. You don't necessarily need a trust. But definitely, I want everybody to know a will is not an estate planning tool that I recommend.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's always a document that's included in an estate planning portfolio, but it's not the instrument that you rely on for distributing your assets.
Wow.
Yes, and everybody should have death beneficiaries on their assets if they don't have a trust. It's really that basic and simple.
I heard you say earlier, estate planning starts with love. I think you said that was the tagline.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's the tagline for my firm, Infinity Estate Law. I really like it because when we are thinking about estate planning, you come to understand you don't do it for yourself, right? Yeah, you're doing it for your loved ones. You're making sure that they don't have to go through hassles or, any trouble, and they just get their gifts, the gifts that you give them, hopefully with love.
That's beautiful. So you were on a TED Talk. You have a TED Talk.
I do.
That is fascinating. And
Oh, thanks.
think you said it's called Can We Truly Be at Peace with Death? Something like that?
Yes, with death.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So that was a TED Talk on my journey of awakening to how important it is for us to contemplate death and its purpose in our life.
Okay.
Yeah, and it kind of goes through the story too of how it actually, it leads to how I ended up here in Hawaii. And I'm not going to give away too much of this TED Talk.
Okay.
I encourage you to watch it. It's on YouTube. And if you search for my name, Julie Suen, you will find it. But Hawaii is the one place where I've felt the most alive in my life. And that's what led me to being here. It's a story about how I started as a junior attorney. And what I was doing at that time was insurance litigation. And much of my work had to quantify how much somebody's life was worth.
Oh.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
In dollar signs.
How else do we quantify things in our lives? Unfortunately, right? I mean, and this is why I brought death into that story, is when you understand how valuable each and every single breathing minute our life is, you will never qualify your life with dollar signs anymore. Right? As an attorney, how do people bill? Billable hours. You know how billable hours are calculated? Every 6 minutes. Right? So as a junior attorney in this practice where you start looking at everybody's life as files, right? And you are to quantify how much their life is worth based on what? Based on what, really? That's the question. Based on what? How do we do that? But then if you look at the bigger picture, we do this all the time. How do we pay people? How do we quantify something that we buy at a grocery store? What think about the farmer who had to put their sweat and tears into growing something, and this is something that we just grab off the shelf. And right? And it's just, it leads to so much bigger. And then when you come back to what really woke me up was I was at a Starbucks lining up for my morning coffee, and I was saying to myself, wow, like I really need something to wake me up. Like this is not how I envisioned I would be living at this, after going through all this school, after all that work, this is where I am doing with my life now. I need something different to wake me up. And randomly, I saw this brochure lying around in Starbucks, and it's a brochure to run a marathon and fundraise for cancer.
Okay.
And I was still smoking at that time. I never run. For whatever reason, I signed up for the info session. I showed up, and I was inspired enough to sign up for it, and raised thousands of dollars within 3 months, trained for the marathon. It was the team members that were formed and I trained with for that charity fundraiser. They were all affected by having somebody died in their life, either their parents. There was one lady, her parents both died from cancer on the same date 1 year apart.
Wow.
I never forgot that. I don't know why, and there's another guy who was training with us, and he was still doing chemo. And then there was this little kid that would come in and do inspiration talks and etc. And he had leukemia, and he's 5.
Wow.
And he impacted me the most. And so I was going through, I was still doing my law firm stuff, whatever, during the daytime. And then, after work or on the weekends, I would be with these people. And then I saw what we were doing in the firm environment and what we were doing outside of that environment. And I just couldn't continue doing that.
Wow.
I couldn't segment my life at 6-minute billable rate. And, and yeah. So, I mean, a lot of things had to happen in between. But this leads back to one of your questions, how I created this firm, is I don't want to charge people by billable hours as much as I can. I don't, my time and your time is not quantifiable.
Wow.
That's it.
I love how something that you realized in principle, you're able to apply in practice
Thank
in the
you.
workplace. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need more of that in this world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for people to understand the value of their time. It's
Yeah.
all we have.
Yeah.
Right? It's all, and I mean, and I see this in estate planning practice.
Yeah.
I can see a client a couple months and then they're gone, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and how it still amazes me how many clients come to me and it's literally their first time talking about dying. This is not something they've ever truly contemplated.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with any like the Stoic works, like Marcus Aurelius and Memento Mori? Right. Remember.
No.
Basically, it's I've been told. I don't know if it's legend or what, but when the Caesars would come home victorious in battle, they would have a slave from the opposing army in the chariot with the Caesar, and he would whisper in his ear, "Memento Mori." Basically, remember death. Like in your highest of high moments,
Right.
when you're marching home victorious, like you just burned my village, I am now your slave. Remember death. And from the Stoic perspective, there's value in contemplating death. Even in the Orthodox Christian perspective, there's value in daily thinking upon death. And it sounds kind of morbid, but I mean, you deal with it all the time. People in the medical field deal with it all the time, nurses, doctors, and I don't know, I feel like we as a society, we're so far removed from death, and so much of our lives are avoiding pain and avoiding suffering and avoiding thinking about death, so that when it comes time to actually deal with the realest of real matters, a lot of people don't know what to do. And that's where you come in, right?
I love that. Well, I want to go back to that thing that you were talking about with the slave, because it really, like, I see us even like a second level of meaning to that. The slave is reminding that victor that this came at a price. Your victory came at a price. And it kind of like brings in this circle of life. Like, we died so that your people can live. I mean,
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of the old systems of colonial, like it's that
For
kind
sure.
of mentality that one community has to perish for another to live. But it just gives me the chills.
Yeah, and it's a principle that even applies in the inner person, right? In order for you to progress into the next iteration of yourself, right?
Absolutely.
A part of you has to die. So
Ego death.
when I was hearing your story about billable hours, you're in line at Starbucks, right? And I need something else to wake me up, and you found that realization,
Yeah.
and that was what brought about your transition, moving from like a billable hour scenario. Like, how do we quantify our lives, right? 525,600 in cups of coffee, right? Like, how do we?
I know. Right?
How do we
I
measure?
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also, I love how you said how we avoid feeling, right, suffering and all of that. It's like there's this disconnect.
Right.
I feel like that's, I would call it a disease of modern society. Is we're so disconnected from feeling,
Right.
from what it truly means, what something truly means, from picking up a head of lettuce from the grocery store to planning our death.
Right.
Yeah, there's so much in it if we can just look a little closer. And I mean, that's the gems. That's where you find the gem of living.
In
In looking at the meaning behind it, behind things that we do. It's not just rushing off from one thing to another. You know, we're always so busy. We're always trying to expedite things, right? And this is also something that I always tell my clients, like, you're not buying documents from me. I don't like I don't like the, you know, how people see estate planning, like, you know, you're paying for documents. Well, no, you're not. I have this on my website. This is a relationship, right? I'm going to be here if I still have my practices, I'm still alive, like, I'm going to be here. If your kids need something from me, they're going to call me, like, right? And things will pop up in your life, and you will want me to review it, and you can call me. That's why this is a relationship. It's not a transaction. The disconnect, everything's transactional. It's, you know,
Right.
That's takes the joy and, you know, the golden moments away from what it means to truly live.
And I guess, you know, as I'm listening to you talk, the contemplation of death is valuable in the sense that if we think we're never going to die, then what matters, right? If tomorrow is always here, then today doesn't really matter.
Absolutely.
Right? But if we need that other side of the coin, we need the life on one side and the death on the other side to show us the value, the counter posture of what you said, every breath, right?
Yeah.
Every moment.
Yeah, it's really beautiful because, you know, not every moment's supposed to last forever, right? So it gives us a realistic sense of not holding on to everything for as long as we can, be it money or relationships or any material possessions on the one hand. And on the other hand, it brings you back to the moment to truly be grateful for that moment while you're in that relationship, while you're spending that dollar, right? While you're having that wonderful meal with the hard-earned money that you made, to be really grateful for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's this dual purpose that I see. Yeah. I mean, we can't hold on to people. We know that.
Yeah.
So, you know, so then you're more grateful for it. And we can't hold on to money. So
We can't. Yeah.
we cannot. So, and this goes back to why my approach is always trying to create more. I have clients that come in and they're like, especially, you know, in Hawaii, people don't like to sell their homes. They want it to pass on in their families forever if they can. And they ask, you know, can I do that in my estate planning? And I'm like, well, Auntie, let's brainstorm possibilities here, right? Yeah. I can write it in there however you want it. But let's see what we can come up with if we don't do that.
I think I heard you say that the old style of estate planning was kind of centered around, and you can correct me if I'm misquoting you, but centered around keeping the assets in the family as long as possible. Did you say something like that?
From my observations, yes. Yeah.
And I think I heard you say that you offer a different approach to estate planning. Can you tell me about that?
Yes. So it's really unique. It's got to be right for your family circumstances. But hypothetically, we have a family and we have some assets to be passed on to the next generation. Now, this next generation of children, they're educated, or, you know, they are smart. You know, they know how to spend their money. There's nothing you have to really worry about, right? The approach that I would recommend to my clients in this kind of scenario is to give your kids a little bit more freedom than to take the approach where I'm going to keep these assets in the trust as long as possible. My kids are not going to get any of it until they're 65. I mean, by the time they're 65, level of creativity and productivity is going to be different from when they're 35, let's say. And right? So they can create more earlier if they have access to that money. And at the same time, I do have provisions in my trust where I balance a certain level of caution. So then I will work with you on, okay, who are the trustees? The trustees will have a certain level of discretion over whether or not the kids can withdraw everything at once. And so I do balance these things. And of course, some children do want to keep the assets in the trust, so that I do have provisions in there where they will be allowed to do that as per their choice, because they want perhaps asset protection. If they run a business or if they're a physician, they want that. Yeah, I will have provisions where they want to keep their assets in their trust. So it just gives them more flexibility and liberty. Yeah.
That's fascinating. When I don't know too much about trusts or estate planning. Death actually became a lot more real to me during COVID, right? 2020, 2021. I think it was 2021. I feel like 2020 through 2022 was all just one long year. But somewhere in that gap, one of my tenants in my house, not a house that I lived in, a rental property that I had, one of my tenants died in the house. And so another one of my tenants who lived in a separate house called me and was like, hey, so-and-so is dead. And I had just seen him. I just collected rent last week, right? I don't know if he was a victim of the, what's the name of that drug that's going around now? Fentanyl. I don't know if he was a victim of the fentanyl epidemic or alcohol or what, but it was just really interesting. He didn't have a will. He didn't have a trust. His estate was essentially in my house. Everything that he owned, his clothes, his coin collection, his photo albums of his nieces and nephews. And basically my family, on behalf of his family, like his family had asked us, right, his next of kin, like, hey, could you package up our deceased relatives' goods? And so my mom helped me out with that. And it was a very sobering spot to be in. I felt like a young kid at the time, right? Packaging up a person whose life, like we had nothing more than a business relationship, right? Landlord tenant. And here we are packaging up his entire life. And shortly after that, a close friend and mentor of mine had passed away in a freak traffic accident, 51 years old. And that, for the first time in my life, was the moment where I was like, okay, I might have another year, I might have another 5. Kobe had 41, Alex had 51, Grandma had 103, right? We don't know.
You can have another day. You don't know.
Yeah. And so, like what you said, valuing the breaths, valuing the moments. It's a good reminder for me to just think about, like a song. A song doesn't last forever, right? As a musician. And if we can pour the love into that note, into that chorus, because at the time, in that moment's all you have, right?
Absolutely. Right.
If somebody was looking for you, if they wanted to find your podcast, if they wanted, you have a podcast.
I do have a podcast.
Tell us about it.
Thank you. So it's not here yet.
Okay.
But it will be in the new year. January 2024 is the launch. And it's called Shine, the definitive podcast for modern awakening souls.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's not on estate planning.
Okay.
As much as I love talking about estate planning, I do take a break from it. It's going to be on New Age spirituality and practices.
Very cool. I'll be on the lookout for that. Maybe I can be a guest.
Oh, I would love that.
That would be great.
So fun.
There's so much more to talk about.
Right. I love that because, a lot of spirituality stuff out there, it's just spirituality. But I love how people like yourself, like an entrepreneur, people who run businesses, but do it also with kind of a sense of purpose and spirituality background, right? That's how I feel like we apply what we learn,
Right.
right? Because there's no point of learning, being a mystic and da 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 da, but you don't really bring it out into the world until you're in the world.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the point, right?
Yeah, I'm sure there's a purpose to that, but
Yeah.
this is another way of expressing, the teachings and how we really live our purpose and things like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
We're going to take a short break, a little coffee break. And this podcast is brought to you by the Hawaii Institute of Real Estate. We are for real estate literacy for all, whether you're looking for pre-license education, whether you're looking for brokers education, or if you just like to learn about real estate. We offer all kinds of educational products at highrealtycourses.com. That's highrealtycourses.com. I'm sitting here with Julie Suen. She's the owner and founder of Infinity Estate Law. She does estate planning, but also so much more. Motivational speaker, podcaster, Julie Suen. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Julie, if somebody's in need of your services, how would they even find you? Where would they go? Do they go on the internet? Are they going to drive to your office? Give you a phone call? What do you like?
They can do all these things.
Okay.
But preferably, check out my website, infinityestatelaw.com.
Great.
And I'm open to providing my number, 808-392-7306. Again, 392-7306. Text me, call me. My podcast Shine to be released in January 2024. So you can find this on any podcast distribution channels. And yeah.
Nice. Who are you for? And I know that sounds like maybe it could be a politically charged question, but who needs your services?
Yes.
Who is your client avatar? I guess that's kind of a weird way of putting it.
Yes.
Who are you serving? How about
yes.
that?
Because of what I do, it's wide, right? We all die, right?
Yes. That is
so,
true.
But of course, anyone with real estate assets, because remember what I said before, anything that you can put a death beneficiary on, you can kind of do the planning on your own. If you're not sure, then definitely reach out. Families, I do a lot of work for families, especially families with minor children. There's a set of other concerns that you have to consider when your kids are not of age, because they cannot just inherit outright. And you also have to consider legal guardianship for them. Right. And I work for a lot of folks who are older and with older children. Right. And then I also help folks who do not have children, but they have some assets and they want to gift it to people that they love. So, it's kind of wide range. What I would say is, you would want to work with me not because of the demographic that you are in, but because you want a practical approach to your planning. You want somebody who is straightforward and tell you what's relevant to you and what's not, right? And like I said, I do more customized planning. I don't charge more, but it's more customized in the sense I'm not just doing a cookie cutter thing for you. I listen to what your needs are, and then we put it in your planning.
I guess I never thought of trust planning as a creative endeavor. I just remembered we're both reading the same book right now, which is The Creative Act by Rick Rubin.
Yes. Right.
You bought it for somebody special?
I did.
Yeah.
Yes.
And could you share one observation that we could kind of connect on?
Well, I'm going to defer to you because you brought the book into our conversation. It must mean something special to you.
There is there's a viral clip of the author, Rick Rubin, saying something along the lines of, when we're in the studio, Rick Rubin is a music producer.
Yes.
When we're in the studio, it's not about, is this going to appeal to this subset of people, or what is the budget? But it's, do I like it, right? Do I love it enough? And in that regard, it is essentially an offering to God, right? My creative output is an offering to God.
Right.
And, as I'm doing a few business endeavors and building out organizational charts and setting aside resources toward one or this project or that project, it can get very stressful to me to figure out, well, how am I going to monetize this? How am I going to make sure that I get paid? And I was telling my business partner, the stress went away as soon as I came to the realization of, instead of planning for monetization, how can we plan for beauty, right? How can you build the most beautiful organizational structure for the people that you're trying to serve? How can you make the most beautiful company for this group of people? Or how can you create the most beautiful hui for this group of people? How can you make sure that everybody's taken care of? And how can you communicate that you're doing these things on their behalf and for the lahui, so to speak, for the group?
Yep.
And the stress went away, and it brought me to realize, like, man, it's not about quantifying with the dollars, right? How else are we going to measure it? And one of the things I like about that book and what Rick Rubin is talking about is, like, we can quantify with beauty, right? And granted, the beauty might be subjective, but there is a such thing as canonical design. There are geometric shapes that repeat themselves over and over and over.
Absolutely.
Down to the molecular level, up into architecture, right?
Yeah.
Up into the cosmos, if you want to go really macro.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, beauty it's subjective, but it's also objective.
It absolutely is. And I love that because it's also, it expands, right? The way you treat your client, the way you treat the hui, the way everything you do has an impact on how they will move forward in how they treat others, how they see their interaction with you, how they see their interaction with the homes they buy from you, they sell from, it colors everything within that, whatever they're doing, that process. And in estate planning is extremely creative. What I do doesn't impact my client. It impacts their next generation.
Wow.
And what they do with that money. And what they do with that money impacts everybody that comes in that money's way. Right? Are they going to build a business? Are they going to, create an investment property? Who's going to rent from them? And they would be impacted. If you look at things at that level, it's practical and it's not. But at the same time, it really keeps you in where your role is. Right. Like, it's not just a transaction. It's not just a file. It's not just, right.
That's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you said is beautiful as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for creating beauty.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Our guest today is Julie Suen. She's the owner of Infinity Estate Law, and her approach is estate planning starts with love. If you'd like to visit her website, it is infinityestatelaw.com, and such a pleasure spending time with you today.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Aloha for now.